Mira had always known her place in the world, or at least, she thought she did. She was the quiet girl who preferred books to people, the diligent librarian who kept her head down and did her work. Her life was comfortable and routine, filled with early morning tea, dusty old books, and afternoons spent organizing the shelves of the town's only library. Nestled in the heart of a small town, the library was her refuge, a sanctuary from a world that often felt too loud, too fast, and too crowded. It was a Tuesday, the quietest day of the week, when the first sign of something strange appeared. Mira noticed it immediately, a small, unmarked package on her desk. She wasn't expecting any shipments that day, and her curiosity got the better of her. Inside was a leather-bound book, its cover worn and cracked, with a symbol embossed on it that Mira didn't recognize. It was neither a book she had ordered, nor one she had seen before. The symbol was striking, a swirling star surrounded by unfamiliar markings that almost seemed to pulse under her fingertips. Flipping open the book, she discovered its pages were filled with symbols and characters that made no sense. Ancient languages had always fascinated her, and she could recognize elements of old alphabets, Greek, Sumerian, even a few glyphs that resembled Egyptian hieroglyphics. But this text was unlike anything she had encountered. The script had a fluid, almost ethereal quality, as though the ink had been poured onto the page from another realm. Intrigued, Mira set the book aside and promised herself she'd research the symbols later that night. The rest of her day passed uneventfully, with patrons drifting in and out, browsing the shelves or requesting books. But as she went about her tasks, she couldn't help but feel a subtle, lingering sense of being watched. Once, when she looked up from her desk, she caught a glimpse of a figure standing by the library door, shrouded in shadows. But when she blinked, the figure was gone. As evening approached and the last patron left, Mira closed up the library, her mind still buzzing with thoughts of the mysterious book. Alone in the dim glow of the library's reading lamps, she flipped the book open again and began studying the pages in earnest. The characters seemed to rearrange themselves under her gaze, as if inviting her to understand them. The more she looked, the more her fingers tingled, an unusual warmth spreading through her hands. Mira could almost hear a faint hum, as though the pages themselves were vibrating, whispering secrets only she could hear. She leaned closer, feeling an inexplicable urge to reach out, to trace the symbols with her finger. As she did, she felt something spark beneath her skin, a fleeting but unmistakable rush of energy. Startled, she pulled her hand back, her heart pounding. She was certain she had imagined it, but the sensation lingered, an inexplicable connection to the book that felt almost alive. And that was when she noticed another anomaly. The words, which had been entirely incomprehensible only moments before, now seemed to be shifting, forming into letters she could read. The symbols flickered like embers, transforming into English words right before her eyes. Mira took a deep breath, her pulse racing as she read the words. To the heir of Starion, you have been hidden for too long. The time of awakening is near. Seek the blue star, and your true path will unfold. The heir of Starion? The message felt as if it were directed at her, but she dismissed the idea as nonsense. She was Mira, a librarian with no family beyond the elderly aunt who had raised her. She wasn't some heir of an unknown place called Starion. Her world was filled with books and shelves, not with mysterious destinies and blue stars that as she closed the book, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, like a silent but powerful wave sweeping across her life, unseen but undeniable. That night, as she left the library and walked home under a sky sprinkled with stars, she felt more alone than ever. Yet also, for the first time, as if her solitude might be an illusion, in her dreams that night, she saw it clearly. A brilliant blue star hovering just beyond her reach, calling to her in a voice that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, drawing her closer until she was enveloped in a warmth that felt like home. In her dream, she reached out to touch it, and as her fingers grazed the star, she woke with a gasp, her heart pounding, her fingers tingling with the same strange warmth she'd felt in the library. The next day, Mira returned to the library, her eyes drawn to the mysterious book on her desk. She couldn't explain it, but she knew that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet understand. The quiet librarian was gone, and in her place was someone on the verge of a revelation, a hidden identity waiting to be unearthed. The days following Myra's discovery of the mysterious book were marked by an unusual sense of anticipation, as though something was waiting just beyond her perception. She went about her daily routines as normal, but an eerie feeling lingered, something unknown watching her from the edges of her life. That quiet Tuesday when she'd found the book had set off a cascade of subtle, yet increasingly strange occurrences around town. It began innocently enough. A group of kids playing near the old mill reported seeing a blue light flash across the sky, leaving them dazed and disoriented. Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly woman who owned the bakery down the street, mentioned having strange dreams of a distant star that seemed to call her name. And Mr. Gable, the school's science teacher, complained of a sudden, inexplicable headache that made him feel as if he were on another planet. At first, Myra dismissed these incidents as mere coincidence or town gossip, until the strange blue light appeared one night, directly above the library. She was closing up, the last person in the building, as usual. It was late, and the town lay quiet beneath a blanket of stars. Just as she locked the front doors, a flash lit up the sky, casting the library's walls in a vivid blue hue. Myra froze, her breath catching in her throat as the light pulsed like a heartbeat, strong and insistent, before fading as abruptly as it had appeared. For a moment, all was silent, and then an odd hum vibrated through the ground beneath her feet, deep and resonant, like the rumbling of a distant storm. Myra felt it resonate through her bones, a sensation both unsettling and strangely familiar. She looked up at the sky, but the light was gone. In its place, the stars seemed to sparkle more intensely, almost winking at her. As she unlocked the door to investigate inside, her gaze fell on the desk, where a small, glittering blue stone rested, something that had not been there moments earlier. The stone was smooth and cool to the touch, shimmering with an inner light, a pulse of faint energy that seemed to match the hum she had felt. Holding it made her fingertips tingle, sending a warm sensation up her arm. A sense of longing and homesickness flooded her, though she couldn't understand why. Compelled by an invisible force, Myra held the stone close, feeling its warmth seep into her palm. The air around her seemed to change, becoming heavier, almost charged. The library's normally familiar scent of old pages and ink now had an undercurrent of something foreign, like the faint scent of ozone before a storm. Myra's senses were heightened. She felt as though she was straddling two worlds, the quiet, ordinary life she knew and a strange, ancient place, rich with mystery. In the dim light of the library, she studied the stone more closely. It wasn't a gem or any stone she could identify. Its texture was smooth yet seemed to ripple beneath her fingertips, as if alive. She placed it back on her desk, fearing it would vanish like a dream, only to notice the symbols in the mysterious book flickering again, shifting almost imperceptibly. The time draws near. The heir must be prepared. The message seemed clearer, almost as though it were becoming accustomed to her mind. The words carried an urgency that Myra couldn't ignore, a call that resonated deep within her. Feeling her pulse quicken, she carefully slipped the stone in her pocket and locked the library doors for the night, casting a wary glance around as she made her way home. The next morning, Myra awoke with a strange sense of purpose. She felt invigorated, as though the energy of the blue stone had seeped into her dreams. Her hand instinctively reached for her pocket, finding the stone exactly where she'd left it. She held it close, feeling its warmth spread through her palm once more. She knew that she should leave it at home, yet something inside her insisted she take it with her to the library. As she walked through town, she noticed others seemed to be experiencing a similar unease. Mrs. Abernathy's usual smile was replaced with a distant look, her eyes drifting toward the sky every few minutes. Mr. Gable wore dark glasses, rubbing his temples as though fighting off another headache. The children who usually filled the square with laughter played quietly, casting glances at the sky as if expecting another flash of light. By the time Mira arrived at the library, an eerie quiet had settled over the town. She sat down at her desk, running her fingers over the book's strange cover. Once more, the symbols seemed to shimmer, enticing her to open it. As she did, the stone in her pocket grew warm, almost burning. She pulled it out, holding it close to the book, and suddenly, the writing shifted, words forming as if specifically meant for her. When the blue star rises, so too shall the hidden heir. Your world awaits. Will you answer? The words filled her mind, almost as if whispered into her thoughts, bypassing her ears. The quiet librarian felt a chill, a sense of being seen by forces beyond her understanding. She felt her pulse race, but even in her confusion, a spark of curiosity grew within her. She didn't know what this heir business meant, or why it felt so disturbingly familiar. Yet her heart seemed to resonate with the words, as if awakening from a long, deep slumber. Lost in thought, Mira didn't hear the library door open. A tall man with a calm, knowing expression entered quietly, his silver-gray eyes flickering with interest as he observed her from the entrance. His presence was so subtle that it wasn't until he cleared his throat that she looked up, startled. She recognized him vaguely as one of the town's newer residents, though she didn't know his name. He seemed kind enough, but something about him set her on edge. "Good morning, Mira," he said, his voice deep and smooth. His eyes lingered on the blue stone in her hand. She felt her cheeks flush, embarrassed to be caught so engrossed in her strange treasure. "Good morning, sir," she replied, uncertain. He smiled, as though sensing her unease. "Knox," he said, introducing himself. "I'm just a humble researcher, fascinated by ancient texts and languages. I heard you have an impressive collection here." His gaze was unwavering, and though Mira knew she should be polite, something about his manner struck her as intrusive, even slightly unnerving. Yet his curiosity seemed genuine, and he held himself with an air of calm authority. She found herself nodding, gesturing toward the library shelves. "Yes, we do have quite a few texts on various subjects," she replied, managing a polite smile. She didn't offer him much more, her instinct warning her to keep the strange book and the blue stone to herself. As Knox browsed the shelves, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more about her than he was letting on. Every now and then, he would glance at her, his gaze lingering on the book and stone, as if drawn by an invisible force. The air between them felt thick with unspoken questions, each aware of the other's secrets without understanding them fully. By the time he left, Myra's mind was racing. Knox had been friendly enough, but his questions, subtle inquiries about her family, her past, and the library's oldest volumes, had only deepened her unease. She watched him leave, his silhouette disappearing into the town's narrow streets, and felt as though she had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. As the day wore on, Mira kept her focus on her work, yet her mind kept drifting back to the blue star she'd seen, the cryptic messages in the book, and the strange man who seemed to know more than he let on. Little did she know, her quiet life was fading into the past, giving way to a path filled with unknown dangers, hidden allies, and the call of a destiny she never imagined. Mira couldn't shake the sense that her life was spiraling into something both extraordinary and frightening. The blue stone weighed heavily in her pocket as she went about her daily tasks in the library. Each time she touched it, she felt a tingling warmth, a comfort that belied the disturbing memories it seemed to trigger. Fragments of dreams, of starlit skies and distant voices, flickered at the edges of her mind, tugging at a past she didn't remember having. After a sleepless night, haunted by visions of distant worlds, Mira decided she couldn't ignore the blue stone and the strange book any longer. She had to understand what was happening. With renewed determination, she locked herself in the library's back room, a secluded, dimly lit space reserved for rare texts and private study. There, amidst the scent of aged leather and faded parchment, she felt cocooned from the outside world, a perfect haven to explore the mysteries at hand. She took out the stone, its glow subtle but hypnotic in the dim light, and laid it on the desk next to the book. Almost instinctively, her hand reached toward the stone, her fingers grazing its surface. The moment her skin made contact, a surge of warmth shot through her, coursing up her arm and settling in her chest. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, a rush that felt strangely familiar, as though her body had been waiting for this sensation her entire life. As the warmth spread, Mira felt a subtle shift within herself. Memories, no, not quite memories, more like impressions surfaced. She saw herself as a child, staring up at a night sky lit by unfamiliar stars, a woman's voice whispering to her in a language that resonated in her heart, though she couldn't understand it. The voice was filled with longing, a love so profound that it left Mira breathless. And then, a sharper memory, one that startled her with its clarity. Mira, barely 5 years old, standing in a lush forest she didn't recognize, staring up at the woman from her dreams. The woman was ethereal, her hair like silver starlight, her eyes a piercing shade of blue, just like the stone on the desk. She held Myra's face in her hands, her expression solemn and filled with sorrow. "You are special, my starling," she whispered. "Remember, even when you don't understand, remember who you are." In a flash, the memory faded, leaving Mira trembling. Her heart raced as she tried to steady herself, her breath shallow and quick. She didn't know who this woman was or how she could remember something she had no recollection of experiencing. But there was no denying the truth. These weren't ordinary memories. They felt alien, as though they came from a life that wasn't hers but felt profoundly connected to her in ways she couldn't explain. Myra's hands shook as she picked up the book, flipping through its pages with newfound urgency. The symbols on the pages no longer seemed foreign. They shifted, shimmering like liquid silver, and then, slowly, began to reshape into English words. "The blood remembers. To the heir of Starion, your power is within. Let it guide you." The words hit her like a bolt of lightning, leaving her breathless. The heir of Starion. She wasn't sure what Starion meant, but her instincts told her it wasn't anything from Earth. Her pulse quickened as she reread the words, feeling the deep tug of something within herself. She had always felt different, always sensed that she didn't fully belong. But she had buried those feelings under layers of books and quiet routines, convinced they were simply the musings of an overly sensitive girl. Now, however, those feelings took on a new, terrifying significance. As she sat there, staring at the book in stunned silence, her finger accidentally brushed the edge of the stone. A sudden jolt of pain shot through her hand, and before she could pull away, she noticed a small bead of blood forming on her fingertip, shimmering faintly in the dim light. Startled, she watched as her blood absorbed a strange, blue-tinted glow, as if the stone's energy was reacting to her very essence. She blinked, the world around her narrowing to that tiny droplet of blood. Her breath caught as the faint glow spread through her veins, her entire arm lighting up in a network of shimmering blue lines, like constellations forming beneath her skin. She felt the energy flowing through her, awakening parts of her that had been dormant, a power that felt ancient, vast, and exhilarating. The sensations were overwhelming, but Myra's body seemed to know how to handle it, adapting to the influx of power as though it were natural. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, trying to steady herself. In the silence, a faint voice began to speak within her mind, a voice that felt like her own, yet older, wiser, layered with echoes of another world. "You carry the blood of the stars. Embrace it. You are more than you know." The voice faded, leaving Mira with an acute sense of loss, but also a new awareness of herself. She could feel the power lingering within her, waiting to be tapped, a river of strength flowing through her veins. For the first time, she felt truly alive, as though she had only been half awake her entire life. Over the next few hours, Mira experimented cautiously with her newfound abilities, marveling at what she could do. She could feel the air around her hum with energy when she concentrated, could sense the life in the plants outside the library as if they were part of her. When she held her hand over the book, the symbols rearranged themselves effortlessly, revealing new passages and messages, almost as though the book were communicating with her directly. One message stood out, etched in the silver letters that seemed to glow brighter than the rest. Beware those who seek the heir. Not all come in peace. They know what you are, and they will stop at nothing to find you. The weight of the warning settled heavily on her. She thought of Knox, the mysterious man who had shown up the day before, with his intense gaze and cryptic questions. Could he be one of the people the book was warning her about? He had claimed to be a researcher, but Mira couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more about her origins than he had let on. A surge of panic welled up within her. If this was real, if she truly was some kind of alien heir, what did that mean for her life? For her safety? She had always dreamed of adventure, but had never wanted anything like this. A destiny steeped in danger and mystery. Part of her wanted to run, to hide away and ignore the strange pull of the stone and the book. But another part, the part that had felt the warmth of her mother's hand in that forgotten memory, knew she couldn't turn back now. As evening descended, Myra's mind swirled with questions. She felt a strange mix of fear and excitement, an aching curiosity she couldn't ignore. Every fiber of her being urged her to seek answers, to embrace this new reality, however terrifying it might be. She clutched the blue stone tightly, feeling its reassuring warmth. She was no longer just Mira, the shy librarian. She was something more, something vast and powerful, carrying secrets written in her very blood. Stepping out of the library, she looked up at the night sky, her gaze drawn instinctively to a single, faintly glowing star that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. It felt like an invitation, a beacon calling her home. For the first time, she acknowledged that she was more than just a girl with a quiet life and a love for books. She was the heir of something ancient, a child of the stars with a destiny that waited just beyond the horizon. And as she stood there, staring at the blue star above, she whispered softly to herself, a vow spoken to the silent night. The days after Myra's awakening were a blur of new sensations, unanswered questions, and hidden fears. Her mind buzzed with fragments of memories she didn't understand, symbols and voices half remembered from a life that seemed simultaneously hers and foreign. She moved through her daily routines in a daze, watching the world with a heightened awareness, feeling the pulse of something powerful and ancient in her veins. And through it all, the blue stone remained her quiet companion, tucked safely in her pocket, a constant reminder of the truth she could no longer ignore. The library, her sanctuary, felt different now. She still loved the quiet hours spent among the shelves, but a part of her was always alert, on edge, as if she were waiting for something or someone. Every time the door creaked open, Myra's heart would skip a beat, wondering if it would be another sign of the mysteries she'd unearthed. It was on a stormy afternoon, as rain pattered against the library's windows, that he came back. Knox, the enigmatic stranger with the silver-gray eyes. Mira felt a shiver of recognition the moment she saw him. His presence seemed to fill the room, like a shadow cast by an unseen light. He moved with a quiet grace, every step precise, as though he were measuring the space around him. Despite his calm demeanor, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that he was dangerous, like a predator in disguise. "Mira," he greeted her, his voice smooth and deep, laced with a tone that was almost familiar. He studied her carefully, his gaze intense, yet unreadable. "Knox," she replied, attempting to keep her voice steady. She avoided looking directly into his eyes, feeling as though he could see through her, into her thoughts and secrets. "Back again for research?" A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Yes, among other things. I find this library to be unexpectedly rich in resources." His gaze flicked to the book on her desk, the ancient text with its alien symbols. Mira instinctively shifted in front of it, her fingers brushing the edge of the blue stone in her pocket, feeling its warmth spread through her hand, grounding her. "Interesting text," he commented, noticing her movement. His tone was casual, but Mira detected a sharpness beneath it. "Ancient languages, I presume?" "Something like that," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The room felt heavy with unspoken words, the air thick with tension. She wanted to trust him. Something about him felt oddly familiar, as if they shared a hidden bond. But she couldn't ignore the sense of danger that simmered beneath his calm exterior. Knox took a step closer, his gaze never wavering. "Mira," he said quietly, his tone shifting, becoming softer, almost conspiratorial. "Have you ever wondered who you really are? Where you come from?" The question struck her like a bolt of lightning. She felt a flash of anger and fear. Who was he to ask her such a personal question? And yet, deep down, she knew he wasn't just making idle conversation. He was testing her, probing for a reaction. She forced herself to stay calm, meeting his gaze despite the unease gnawing at her. "I think everyone wonders that at some point," she replied carefully, choosing her words with caution. "What about you? Do you wonder where you're from?" For a moment, Knox's expression softened, a flicker of something vulnerable crossing his face. But it vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. "I know exactly where I'm from," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And I know why I'm here." A chill ran down her spine. His words held a weight she couldn't ignore. There was something deliberate, almost predatory, about the way he was watching her, as if he were studying her every reaction, analyzing her responses. Myra's heart pounded as she realized she might be in over her head, that this stranger was no ordinary researcher. "I'm here to protect something, or rather, someone," he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "Someone very important, whose life holds a greater significance than she may realize." Myra's blood ran cold. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but her hands clenched at her sides. Did he know? Could he sense the truth she had only just begun to understand? She wanted to ask him outright, to demand answers, but a part of her held back, wary of revealing too much. "Protection from what, exactly?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear prickling at her skin. "From those who would seek to control her, to use her power for their own ends," he replied smoothly, his tone almost conversational. "The heir of Starion has enemies, Mira. She's not safe as long as they're looking for her." The words hung in the air, thick with implication. Myra's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of suspicion and dread. She had heard that name before, Starion. The name was in the book, on the pages that seemed to come alive only under her touch. Could it be possible that he was talking about her? Knox took a step closer, his voice lowering. "You've felt it, haven't you? The pull of something greater, something ancient, calling to you. You know you're not like the others here. You feel it in your blood." Myra's heart pounded so loudly she thought he might hear it. She forced herself to remain calm, though every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide. The realization was terrifying, but part of her couldn't deny it. She did feel different, always had, and after touching the blue stone, awakening something dormant within her, she could no longer pretend otherwise. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, hoping her voice didn't betray the tremor in her chest. Knox's gaze softened, and for a moment, he almost looked sad. "You don't have to be afraid, Mira. I've spent my life preparing for this moment, for the day when I would find you. My loyalty is to you and to your people. I know you don't understand yet, but you will. Soon, you'll know everything." A flicker of anger flared within her. Who was he to tell her what she would or wouldn't know? Her life had been simple, predictable, until now. She wasn't ready to give it up for some vague destiny or ancient bloodline. But even as she tried to cling to her old life, the part of her that had awoken, the part that felt the hum of energy beneath her skin, knew that Knox was telling the truth. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "If what you're saying is true, then I deserve answers. Who am I really? And what do you want from me?" Knox hesitated, a look of regret crossing his face. "I wish I could tell you everything, but there are rules, protocols. You have to discover it for yourself. I can guide you, protect you, but the path is yours to walk." Before she could respond, a sudden flash of blue light filled the room, illuminating Knox's face. His expression darkened, and he turned, his gaze sharp and alert. He muttered something under his breath in a language she didn't understand, a string of words that sounded melodic yet intense, carrying a sense of urgency. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Knox didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be listening, his head cocked as though hearing something far off. Finally, he turned back to her, his face set in grim determination. "They're close," he said quietly. "I thought I had more time, but they must have sensed your awakening. You need to come with me, Mira. Now." Panic surged through her. "Come with you? I don't even know you." "I understand," he said, his voice gentle, yet urgent. "But they're not here to give you a choice. You're not safe, not here. If they find you before you're ready." He trailed off, his expression darkening. "Please, Mira. I protected you from afar for as long as I could. But now they're closing in." She stared at him, her mind a swirl of fear and confusion. Everything in her screamed to run, to hide. And yet, as she looked into his eyes, she felt a flicker of trust, a sense that he genuinely meant her no harm. After a moment of hesitation, Mira nodded, her pulse pounding in her ears. "All right," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll come with you." Knox exhaled, a look of relief crossing his face. "Good. Keep the stone close," he said, gesturing to her pocket. "It's a link to your true heritage. It may even save your life." As they moved to leave the library, Mira cast one last, lingering look at the familiar space, knowing deep down that her life was about to change forever. The quiet librarian, the girl who lived in books, was no more. She was stepping into the unknown, guided by a destiny she had only just begun to understand, led by a stranger whose loyalty ran deeper than she could fathom. And as they slipped out into the stormy night, Mira knew there was no turning back. Myra's mind spun with the events of the past few days as she trailed behind Knox, moving silently through the wet, darkened streets. The familiar town seemed foreign now, a labyrinth of shadows and lurking threats. Rain pattered softly around them, the only sound breaking the silence between Mira and her enigmatic protector. She had so many questions, and each step took her further from the life she knew. She wanted to trust Knox, yet her instincts kept her on edge, the uncertainty of it all coiling within her like a spring ready to snap. After a tense journey through side streets and alleyways, Knox led her to an old, abandoned building on the outskirts of town. The air inside was damp, smelling faintly of rust and forgotten things. He led her up several flights of stairs and finally into a small, hidden room at the very top, its only light streaming through a dusty, cracked skylight. "We should be safe here," Knox said, his voice barely above a whisper as he locked the door behind them. "For now, anyway." Mira glanced around, taking in the sparse space. A few scattered supplies, a table, and an old cot were the only furnishings. Knox, however, seemed unfazed by the surroundings, as if he had been here many times before. He turned to her, his eyes sharp, scrutinizing her every reaction. "Sit," he instructed, motioning to the edge of the cot. "There's something you need to understand before we go any further." Mira complied, though her mind was racing. She felt the blue stone warm in her pocket, a familiar anchor in the midst of the unknown. She pulled it out instinctively, clutching it tightly as Knox continued. "The stone," he said, nodding at it. "It's more than a relic, Mira. It's a direct link to your ancestry, a part of your true self. You're different. Your blood carries the legacy of a people who have walked among the stars, a people with powers that Earth has never seen. The Starion royal bloodline, the blood you carry, holds abilities that are only now starting to awaken within you." Mira felt her stomach clench. Her thoughts went to the strange visions, the flashes of memory, and the subtle changes in her body since she'd touched the stone. She had sensed it all along, though she hadn't wanted to admit it, even to herself. "What kind of powers?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Knox's gaze softened slightly, and for a moment, he seemed almost sympathetic. "Each Starion heir's abilities manifest differently," he explained. "But there are constants, a heightened perception, energy manipulation, and, if I'm not mistaken, telepathy." Mira stared at him, her pulse racing. Telepathy? The very idea seemed impossible, and yet it struck a chord within her, as if she'd always known, in some distant part of herself, that she was capable of such things. Knox gave a slow nod. "With time and practice, You'll be able to communicate without words, to sense thoughts, intentions. Your people are born with these abilities, Mira. Your powers were always there, waiting, but here on Earth, they lay dormant. The stone, the awakening, it's unlocking them. Soon, you won't need it as a conduit. But I don't know how to control any of this, Mira said, frustration and fear creeping into her voice. I've only just found out who I am. What I am? How am I supposed to handle powers I didn't even know I had? Knox held her gaze, his expression solemn. That's why I'm here, he said. To help you understand, to teach you to control what's inside of you. But you have to trust me. Trust. It was such a simple word, yet so complex. Mira wanted to believe him, wanted to feel safe under his guidance. Yet her mind still buzzed with doubts. Still, if she had any chance of understanding her powers, of defending herself from the unknown threats closing in around her, she had no choice. Knox took a step closer, holding out his hand. I want you to try something, he said. Give me your hand. Focus on the stone in your pocket and take a deep breath. Concentrate on the warmth, the energy within it. Reluctantly, Mira placed her hand in his, feeling an odd electric current spark between them. She closed her eyes, following his instructions, and let her thoughts settle on the blue stone. She imagined its warmth spreading through her hand, up her arm, and into her chest, filling her with a sensation that was both calming and invigorating. As she concentrated, a faint hum began to rise within her, a resonance that echoed through her bones. She could feel Knox's presence beside her, his own energy intertwining with hers. She reached out mentally, instinctively, and to her astonishment, a wave of emotions washed over her. She sensed his tension, a deep-rooted determination, and, buried beneath it all, a profound sadness, a wound he carried within him like a shadow. Startled, she pulled her hand back, breaking the connection. Her eyes flew open, meeting Knox's steady gaze. You felt it, didn't you? He asked quietly. A glimpse of my emotions. That's the beginning of telepathy, Mira. You're more powerful than you realize. Myra's mind reeled. The experience had felt so intimate, so raw. She had never experienced anything like it, and the sudden depth of it frightened her. She wasn't ready to peer into the minds and hearts of others, to feel their emotions so deeply. But even as she withdrew from the sensation, a part of her craved it, an instinct that felt as natural as breathing. Before she could voice her fears, a loud crash echoed from outside the building, followed by hurried footsteps. Knox's face darkened, and he moved to the window, his posture tense, eyes scanning the street below. They found us, he muttered, his voice tight. I thought we had more time. Myra's heart pounded as fear clawed at her throat. Oh, who's out there? The faction that opposes your family, Knox replied. They've been hunting the Starion bloodline for generations, hoping to eradicate any claim to the throne. They want you, Mira. They know what you are, and they won't stop until they have you. Panic surged within her. Her powers might be awakening, but she was far from ready to defend herself. She looked to Knox, fear and desperation in her gaze. What do I do? She asked, her voice trembling. Stay calm, Knox said, his tone firm. We don't have time to teach you everything, but there's one thing you can do. Remember that energy you felt, the warmth, the hum? Tap into it. Let it flow through you like a river. It's a part of you, a power that belongs to you alone. Mira took a shaky breath, closing her eyes and focusing inward. She reached for the warmth, the energy within her, allowing it to fill her. Slowly, she felt a tingling sensation spread through her body, as though every cell was vibrating with a quiet, fierce intensity. She could feel the power in her veins, a force that was both alien and intimately hers. The footsteps outside grew louder, echoing through the halls. Mira opened her eyes, and Knox's gaze softened as he saw the change in her. There was no time for words. The door flew open, and 3 figures burst into the room, their faces shadowed, their eyes cold and calculating. Mira, one of them said, his voice low and menacing. Come with us. You belong to Starion, but not in the way you think. A surge of anger flared within her, and instinctively she raised her hand. She didn't fully understand what she was doing, but the energy responded, flowing through her like a storm. Her vision seemed to sharpen, her senses heightening as she focused on the intruders. Without warning, a pulse of energy shot from her hand, hitting the closest figure squarely in the chest. He stumbled back, his expression shocked as he clutched his side, struggling to stay on his feet. The other two hesitated, wary of the unexpected force she had unleashed. Knox moved quickly, positioning himself between her and the intruders, his own energy pulsing faintly as he prepared to defend her. Myra's heart raced, but she felt a fierce determination welling up within her, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She was no longer just a helpless librarian, hiding in fear. She was the heir of Starion, and in that moment, she embraced her destiny. The figures exchanged a glance, their expressions hardening. "This isn't over," one of them spat, his gaze locked on Mira with a mixture of anger and respect. "You may have the power, but you don't know how to use it. We'll be back." With a final glare, the intruders retreated, disappearing into the shadows. Mira slumped, her body trembling with exhaustion as the adrenaline began to fade. She looked at Knox, her gaze filled with questions and fear, but also a glimmer of newfound strength. "You did well," he said, his voice gentle, a rare smile touching his lips. "You're stronger than you know, Mira, and this is only the beginning." In that moment, Mira felt the following days were a blur as Mira adjusted to her new reality. She spent hours with Knox, learning about her powers, practicing with the blue stone, and piecing together fragments of her past. Each exercise left her drained but exhilarated, her abilities developing more quickly than she'd thought possible. Yet even as she trained, a nagging question remained. Why had her family kept this secret? And what exactly was Starion? One evening, as she rested by the dusty window of the safe house, Knox approached her, his expression unreadable. He held something in his hand, a small, orb-shaped device that shimmered faintly in the dim light. "It's time you learned everything," he said softly, sitting beside her and holding the orb out. "This will help you see the truth of who you are and why you're here. But I warn you, it may be difficult to accept." Myra's heart raced. She took a deep breath, nodded, and took the orb from him. The moment it touched her skin, the orb activated, releasing a beam of soft, blue light that surrounded them, filling the room with a gentle hum. She felt herself sink into a trance-like state, her vision fading as the light grew brighter. And then, images began to form around her. She was no longer in the safe house, but standing in a vast, star-filled void. The darkness was alive with stars, nebulae, and distant galaxies, the cosmos sprawling out endlessly before her. It was breathtakingly beautiful, an ancient, silent expanse that felt both humbling and strangely familiar. "Welcome, my starling." The voice was warm and resonant, soft as stardust, yet filled with a profound strength. Mira spun around and found herself face to face with a woman unlike any she had ever seen. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, shimmering as though made of stars themselves, and her eyes glowed with a calm, blue fire that seemed to pierce into Myra's soul. The woman smiled, her gaze tender and knowing. Mira felt an instinctual pull, a recognition that transcended words. This was the woman from her memories, the woman she had seen in dreams, the one who whispered to her in a forgotten language. "Are you my mother?" Myra's voice was barely a whisper, her heart pounding in her chest. The woman nodded, reaching out to cup Myra's face with gentle hands. The touch was warm, grounding, and Mira felt a wave of emotion surge within her. Love, sorrow, pride, and something deeper, an unbreakable bond that went beyond life itself. "Yes, my child," she said, her voice like music. "I am Queen Seraphine, the last queen of Starion. And your mother." Myra's mind raced as she processed this revelation. She had spent her entire life feeling like she didn't belong, like a piece of herself was missing. And now, here was the answer. She was not of Earth. She was a Starion, part of an ancient royal lineage that stretched across galaxies. She felt a mixture of wonder and fear, as if her heart was trying to catch up to the enormity of what she was learning. Why was I sent to Earth? Mira asked, her voice trembling. Why didn't I know about any of this? Queen Seraphine's face softened, her gaze filled with sadness. You were sent to Earth to protect you. Our people faced a terrible threat. A rival faction, powerful and relentless, sought to seize control of Starion. They believed that if they eliminated the royal bloodline, they could take over. I had no choice but to hide you, to send you to a distant world where they would not find you. A pang of sadness shot through Mira. The idea that her mother had sent her away to keep her safe, sacrificing her own presence in her daughter's life, weighed heavily on her. She felt a surge of gratitude and sorrow, a longing she had buried long ago, now flooding to the surface. Queen Seraphine continued, her gaze steady. I knew one day you would awaken, that your blood would call you back to who you truly are. I left pieces of myself in that stone, in dreams, and in memories, so you would not feel entirely alone. Mira swallowed, her throat tight. But why now? Why did everything start happening so suddenly? Because you are of age, Queen Seraphine explained, her voice filled with pride. Your powers needed time to mature. The stone, too, has grown with you, reacting to your energy and allowing you to tap into your abilities when the time was right. Mira felt a pang of guilt and fear. She had hidden from her powers, resisted the pull of her heritage, clinging to her old life and denying who she truly was. But now, in the presence of her mother, that resistance faded. She felt the weight of her destiny settle over her, a responsibility she could no longer ignore. What am I supposed to do now? She asked, her voice shaking. Queen Seraphine's expression grew somber. You must return to Starion, Mira. Our people need you. The faction that destroyed our family is growing stronger. They have spies even here on Earth, and they will stop at nothing to eliminate any remaining heirs. But you hold the key to stopping them. The blood of the royal lineage grants you unique abilities, powers that can protect not only Starion, but Earth as well. The words hit Mira like a tidal wave. She was the last hope of an entire world, a people she had never met yet somehow belonged to. The weight of it felt overwhelming, yet a part of her, the part that had always felt out of place, suddenly felt grounded, as if everything she had experienced had led her to this moment. But I don't know how to control my powers, Mira admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. How can I protect anyone if I don't even know what I'm capable of? Queen Seraphine's expression softened, her gaze warm and encouraging. You are stronger than you realize, my starling. The abilities you have tapped into so far are only the beginning. With guidance and practice, you will learn. You carry within you the strength and wisdom of generations of Starion rulers. Trust in yourself and trust in those who guide you. Mira glanced down at the blue stone in her hand, its light pulsing softly. It was her anchor, her connection to Starion and to her mother's love. She felt a spark of determination ignite within her, a resolve that chased away her fear. She would honor her mother's sacrifice, her legacy. She would embrace her destiny, no matter how frightening it seemed. As if sensing her resolve, Queen Seraphine smiled, her gaze filled with pride. Remember, Mira, she said softly, her voice echoing through the void. You are never alone. I am with you, in your heart, in your blood. And when you need me most, I will be there. The vision began to fade, the stars blurring into darkness. Mira felt a pang of loss as her mother's form grew fainter, her presence slipping away like sand through her fingers. But her mother's voice lingered, soft and reassuring, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. Be strong, my child. Trust in yourself. The stars will always guide you. Mira opened her eyes, finding herself back in the small, dimly lit room of the safe house, the weight of her mother's words settling heavily within her. She looked down at the blue stone in her hand, feeling its warmth and energy. Her mother was gone, but she had left Mira with the strength and knowledge she needed to face what lay ahead. She felt Nox's gaze on her and looked up to find him watching her with an unreadable expression. His eyes held a quiet reverence, as if he, too, sensed the gravity of what she had experienced. "Did you see her?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Mira nodded, unable to speak for a moment as the emotions swelled within her. She wiped a stray tear from her cheek and took a shaky breath. "Yes," she whispered. "I saw her. I know who I am now and what I have to do." Knox's expression softened, a hint of pride flickering in his gaze. "Then you are ready," he said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "Ready to embrace the power within you, to protect not only Starion, but Earth as well. The faction will come for you, Mira. They fear what you represent. But with each day, you grow stronger." Mira nodded, her heart steady, her fears overshadowed by a newfound sense of purpose. She felt the weight of her destiny, but it no longer scared her. Instead, it filled her with a fierce determination. She was more than a quiet librarian in a small town. She was Mira of Starion, the heir of an ancient, powerful lineage, and she would fight for her people, for her family, and for herself. As she stood, ready to begin the next phase of her journey, she looked up at the night sky through the cracked skylight. A single star glowed brightly above, pulsing gently in the darkness, as if sending her a silent message, a reminder of her mother's final words. The stars would always guide her, and she was ready to follow them. The realization of her heritage and destiny filled Mira with both purpose and trepidation. Every day since her encounter with her mother's hologram, she trained with Nox, pushing her powers to new limits and uncovering abilities she hadn't known were possible. Her mind expanded, and she felt herself growing into her legacy, becoming the heir she was meant to be. Yet beneath this growth, an insistent anxiety lingered. Shadows loomed around her, hints of danger just beyond her sight. She knew her enemies were closing in, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. One afternoon, Mira and Nox sat cross-legged on the floor of the safe house, immersed in a training session. Nox had taken her through various exercises, guiding her to sharpen her telepathy, to sense intentions, and even, when she focused hard enough, to glimpse a person's memories. It was exhilarating but exhausting. Her mind ached from the strain, yet she pushed herself harder, driven by the knowledge that her survival and the fate of her people depended on her mastery of these skills. During one such exercise, Mira sensed a strange ripple of emotions emanating from Nox. She closed her eyes, focusing, and felt an unusual mixture of loyalty and guilt pulsing from him. She dismissed it at first, chalking it up to her inexperience, but the feeling persisted. Each time she opened her senses to him, she caught glimpses of unease and flashes of a past she hadn't fully understood. Deciding she could no longer ignore it, she confronted him. "Nox," she began carefully, studying him. "Why do you feel uneasy? There's something you're not telling me." Nox's gaze flickered with surprise, though he quickly masked it. He sighed and looked away, his face cast in shadow. "You're progressing faster than I anticipated," he murmured almost to himself. "I should have known this would come up." Myra's heart pounded, her instincts warning her of something dangerous, something hidden. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nox, if there's something I need to know," he hesitated, his fingers tracing the hilt of his blade, a habit she had come to recognize as a sign of his inner turmoil. Finally, he looked her in the eyes, a hardness there she had never seen before. "There's more to my role here than I've let on," he said, his voice low. "Yes, I was sent to protect you, to guide you as you awakened. But my orders were complicated." Myra's pulse quickened as a sinking dread settled in her stomach. She braced herself, knowing his words would change everything. "My allegiance is to the Starion Queen," he continued, his voice unwavering. "To your mother. But I also had to keep the faction informed. They believe that if they eliminate you, they can end the royal bloodline and claim Starion for themselves. I've been playing both sides, Mira, ensuring your safety by keeping them at a distance while feeding them just enough information to prevent a direct assault." Myra's mind spun as she processed his words. Betrayal, confusion, and a deep-seated anger surged within her. "You've been spying on me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Using me to keep them satisfied while pretending to help me? Knox's face tightened, his jaw clenching. It's not as simple as that, he insisted, his voice filled with a desperation she hadn't heard before. I've done everything in my power to protect you, Mira. If they suspected I wasn't loyal to them, they would have sent more agents, attacked more ruthlessly. I couldn't risk exposing you before you were ready. Knox's expression darkened, his jaw clenching. It was bound to happen sooner or later, he said grimly. You've grown too powerful to remain hidden. They'll do whatever it takes to find you now. Her fear turned to fury, and she glared at him. Is this because of you? Have they been using you to track me all along? Knox shook his head, his gaze intense. No, Mira, this isn't me. They have other ways, agents with abilities that rival even yours. They may have found traces of your energy, or they're simply closing in because of your connection to Starion. A chilling realization struck her. She was out of time. Her enemies were on her trail, her sanctuary compromised, and her sense of betrayal still raw. Yet she couldn't let fear consume her. She was the heir of Starion, a title that meant more now than ever before. She would protect her people and her legacy, even if she had to stand alone. Taking a steadying breath, she turned to Knox, her resolve hardened. Then we have to leave, she said, her voice calm but resolute. It's time to face them head on. I won't let them hunt me down like prey. Knox nodded, his expression solemn but proud. Agreed. I'll be by your side, Mira, as long as you'll have me. For a moment, she held his gaze, searching for any trace of deception. But all she saw was determination and a fierce loyalty that, despite everything, she wanted to trust. She knew the road ahead would be perilous, filled with danger and deception, but she was ready. Gathering her strength, Mira reached for the blue stone, feeling its warmth spread through her, filling her with a power as vast as the stars. She was no longer a helpless librarian or a hidden heir. She was Mira of Starion, and she would reclaim her legacy, no matter the cost. With Knox at her side the journey to leave town and confront the threat looming over her was anything but simple. Mira and Knox traveled mostly by night, moving quietly through back roads and shadowed pathways to avoid detection. Every shadow seemed to hold hidden eyes. Every murmur felt like it could be a signal to their enemies. Mira kept the blue stone close, its reassuring warmth anchoring her as her powers grew sharper and more sensitive. She could sense others now, whispers of energy from miles away, small disturbances in the air when someone thought about her or looked in her direction. This new awareness was thrilling but also terrifying, adding weight to her every step. Knox, though still shrouded in mystery, became her steadying presence, guiding her with unspoken expertise. Though she hadn't yet forgiven him for the deception, Mira had reluctantly come to accept his presence. He was her ally, for now, though she kept her guard up, constantly scanning him for any hint of betrayal. She couldn't afford to trust blindly anymore. Not when so much was at stake. After several days of travel, they arrived in a desolate village, miles from any civilization. The town was nearly abandoned, its buildings worn down by time and neglect. Knox led her to an unassuming inn on the outskirts, explaining that this would be a temporary hideout where they could gather their strength and, hopefully, gather intelligence about their pursuers. The innkeeper, an elderly man with sharp eyes, greeted them without a word, merely nodding in recognition as he led them to a small room at the back. Mira felt a sense of unease settle over her as she examined the room. The walls were thin, and a draft crept in from the cracked windows, chilling the already somber atmosphere. She sensed the presence of others in the building, energy that was faint but distinct, different from ordinary humans. She closed her eyes, focusing on the hum of foreign energy, and felt a rush of recognition. Other beings, like her, but not friendly. This place was hiding more than just two travelers. Knox, she murmured, her gaze darting toward the door. We're not alone here. I can feel others different from humans. They're watching us? He nodded, his expression grim. I know. This is a known sanctuary for those of non-Earth origins. Some of them may be allies. Others could be enemies, spies from the faction. A chill ran down her spine. Then why do we come here? Because, Mira, we have no choice, he replied. It's a dangerous place, yes, but it's also where we can gather the information we need. We need to know how many are following us, how much they know, and who might be willing to help you reclaim Starion. Myra's heart pounded as she realized the risk they were taking. She had spent so long hidden, safe, only just beginning to understand her powers. And now, she was in the midst of potential enemies. She swallowed her fear, reminding herself of the strength that lay within her, the legacy she carried. This was part of the path she had chosen. She couldn't turn back now. That evening, Knox left to gather information from a few of the inn's patrons who were rumored to be informants. Left alone, Mira explored the inn, her senses tuned to the strange energies around her. She passed a dimly lit hallway and felt a prickle of awareness, a hint of familiarity in the air, like a memory from another life. She turned the corner and froze, her gaze falling on a figure cloaked in shadow. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a tall woman with strikingly blue eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dimness. Her features were sharp, elegant, with a kind of cold beauty that seemed almost otherworldly. Myra's pulse quickened, her instincts screaming caution. "Mira of Starion," the woman said, her voice smooth and controlled, but tinged with an edge of contempt. "So, you've finally come out of hiding. I was beginning to think you were only a legend." Mira felt a surge of anger, her body tensing as she took a defensive stance. "And who are you?" she demanded, keeping her voice steady. The woman smirked, her gaze calculating. "My name is Alara. I serve the faction opposing your family's rule. We've been waiting for you for a long time." The admission sent a wave of fear through Mira, but she kept her face impassive. She sensed the cold, controlled energy radiating from Alara, a power similar to her own, yet tainted with a dark, ruthless edge. "What do you want from me?" Mira asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Alara took a step closer, her gaze piercing. "What I want is of little importance, but my leaders, they want you gone. You, Mira, are the last obstacle standing between them and complete control over Starion." Mira clenched her fists, feeling the familiar warmth of the blue stone pulse in her pocket. "You're afraid," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Afraid of what I represent. Afraid that I'll take back what's rightfully mine." Alara's smirk faded, replaced by a flash of irritation. "You don't understand what you're meddling in, child," she sneered. "You may have the blood of the Starion royalty, but you're inexperienced, weak. You have no idea what it takes to wield that kind of power." Mira felt a surge of anger, her power rising in response. The air around her seemed to hum with energy, and she felt her senses sharpen, her awareness expanding. "I may be young, but I won't let you or anyone else take what's mine. Starion is my legacy, and I'll fight for it." Alara laughed, the sound cold and hollow. "Brave words, but words won't protect you. You're out of your depth, Mira. You think a little training and a blue stone make you invincible? There are forces beyond your comprehension, powers you've barely begun to understand." Myra's hand went instinctively to the stone, feeling its comforting warmth, a reminder of her mother's guidance. She knew she was still learning, still discovering her potential, but she wouldn't back down. Without another word, she closed her eyes, reaching for the energy within her. She felt it respond, pulsing through her veins like fire, sharpening her senses. She opened her mind, reaching toward Alara, and felt the woman's emotions, her thoughts, a swirl of resentment, envy, and a surprising undercurrent of fear. Alara stepped back, her eyes widening slightly. She hadn't expected Mira to push into her mind, to sense her intentions so clearly. Mira smiled, feeling a rush of satisfaction. "You're wrong about me, Alara," she said quietly, her voice calm and unyielding. "I may be new to this, but I'm not afraid to fight, and I won't let your faction take what belongs to me and my people." Alara's face hardened, her eyes flashing with anger. "You'll regret this, Mira. We'll see how bold you are when you're alone, with no one to protect you." Without another word, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Mira alone in the dim hallway. The encounter had rattled her, but it had also ignited a fire within her. She felt stronger, more certain of herself. She was no longer the shy librarian who hid from her destiny. She was the heir of Starion, and she would protect her legacy. When Nox returned later that night, Mira told him about the encounter with Alara. His expression turned grave, his jaw clenching as he listened. "This complicates things," he said, his voice low. "If Alara knows where you are, it won't be long before more of them come. We need allies, Mira. We can't face them alone." Mira nodded, her resolve firm. "Then we find them. You said there are those loyal to my family, scattered across the stars. It's time we bring them together." Nox met her gaze, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Then we go to the outer realms," he said. "There are Starion loyalists who live on the fringes, hidden from the faction's reach. If we can convince them to join us, we'll have a fighting chance." Mira felt a surge of excitement mixed with trepidation. This journey would take her far beyond anything she had ever known, but she was ready. The encounter with Alara had shown her the stakes of this battle, and she was determined to protect her people, her world. As they prepared to leave the inn, Mira felt a quiet confidence settle over her. She had faced her first enemy, stared into the eyes of the faction hunting her, and come out stronger. She was no longer a girl hiding from her destiny. She was Mira of Starion, the heir of a lost kingdom, and she would stop at nothing to reclaim it. With Nox by her side, they set out into the night, leaving the quiet town behind, ready to face the challenges that awaited them. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if guiding her forward, and for the first time, Mira felt truly alive, her purpose clear. The war for Starion had only just begun, but Mira was ready to fight for her legacy, and to confront any who stood in her way. The journey to the outer realms was grueling and dangerous, taking Mira and Nox across star paths that twisted and looped through the far reaches of space, dodging patrols and hostile outposts loyal to the faction. These were the isolated regions where Starion loyalists, rebels, and outcasts alike had taken refuge after the fall of Myra's family, and Nox knew the hidden routes well, guiding them with unwavering precision. But the journey tested them both. Each jump across space drained Myra's energy, and her abilities fluctuated unpredictably. She struggled to maintain her focus, her body and mind stretched to their limits by the physical strain and the overwhelming intensity of her awakening powers. Her telepathic abilities would sometimes trigger suddenly, pulling her into the minds of passing strangers or tapping into their thoughts without control. With every jump, her energy felt more volatile, as if her powers were a fire barely contained. Nox, too, seemed tense, his usual calm veneer cracking under the pressure of the journey. Mira noticed his glances when he thought she wasn't looking, the way he seemed to measure her strength and resilience. Despite the uneasy alliance they'd forged after his confession, Mira sensed his lingering guilt. She kept her guard up, letting him know that she hadn't entirely forgiven him and was watching his every move. One particularly turbulent evening, after a narrow escape from a faction patrol, they finally reached their destination, a hidden base carved into the side of a mountain on the edge of a dying planet. The sky above was dim, covered in a haze of distant stars, while jagged peaks loomed around them. The base was concealed within the crumbling rock, invisible to all but those who knew where to look. As they approached, Mira felt a surge of energy ripple from within the mountain, a powerful presence that resonated with her own. She steadied herself, letting the blue stone warm in her hand as she followed Nox into a winding tunnel that led them deeper underground. They soon reached a vast chamber filled with Starion loyalists. Some wore the battle-scarred uniforms of former Starion soldiers, while others looked like civilians, farmers, traders, healers, who had once served her family. All of them turned to stare as Mira entered, their eyes widening as they took in her presence. She could feel their disbelief, hope, and even skepticism radiating through the air. One of them, an older woman with piercing green eyes and silver hair braided tightly, stepped forward. She wore a Starion crest on her chest, the same swirling star symbol Mira had seen in her visions. Her expression was a mixture of awe and caution as she studied Mira. "Is it truly her?" the woman asked, her voice a quiet murmur that echoed through the chamber. "The heir of Starion?" Knox nodded, stepping aside to let Mira stand before the gathered loyalists. "Yes, this is Mira of Starion, daughter of Queen Seraphine. She has returned to claim her birthright." Mira took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She had imagined this moment 100 times during their journey, yet now that it was here, the weight of it settled over her like a mantle. She looked around at the faces before her, feeling the weight of their hopes, their pain, their sacrifices. These people had endured years of hiding, of fighting in the shadows, all because they believed in the Starion legacy, in her. "My people," Mira began, her voice wavering slightly before she steadied herself. "I am Mira of Starion, and I am here to reclaim our world, our freedom. I may not be the ruler my mother was, but I will fight to protect what she left behind and what is ours by right." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mixture of awe and skepticism. Some loyalists nodded, their faces filled with renewed hope, while others exchanged wary glances. One man stepped forward, a tall, grizzled soldier with a scar running down his cheek. His eyes were sharp, assessing her with a scrutiny that made her feel exposed. "We've been waiting for this day," he said, his voice gruff. "But words alone won't reclaim Starion, young heir. The faction has power, resources, allies in every corner of the galaxy. They will come for you, and they will bring forces you cannot imagine. Are you prepared to lead us into a war against that?" Mira felt a surge of defiance rise within her, her fear tempered by the fire of her conviction. She looked him in the eye, holding his gaze with a fierce determination. "I know what I'm asking of you," she said, her voice steady. "But I am not the helpless girl they tried to hide. I've trained, I've learned. I carry my mother's blood, and I carry the power that comes with it. Together, we are stronger than they know. And with your help, I believe we can take back Starion." The loyalists exchanged glances, some nodding in approval, others murmuring doubts. Mira could sense their uncertainty, the hesitation of people who had suffered too much to risk another failure. She knew she had to show them her strength, prove that she was ready to lead them. Without hesitation, she reached for the blue stone, holding it high above her head. She closed her eyes, feeling the familiar warmth pulse through her, the energy spreading through her veins like liquid fire. She concentrated, focusing her thoughts on her connection to Starion, her lineage, and the legacy of her mother. The stone responded, its light brightening until it filled the entire chamber with a brilliant blue glow. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the light expanded, casting shadows that danced along the walls. Mira could feel the power within her growing, her senses sharpening as she opened herself fully to the energy of her ancestors. In that moment, she felt a rush of memories flood her mind, images of Starion as it had once been, a world of lush forests and crystal-clear lakes, of vibrant cities and grand palaces. She saw her mother's face, proud and determined, and felt a surge of her mother's strength flow into her. When she opened her eyes, Mira met the gaze of each loyalist in turn, letting them see the conviction in her expression. "This is my birthright," she said firmly, "and I will not let them take it from us." A silence fell over the chamber, the air heavy with anticipation. Then, one by one, the loyalists began to kneel before her, their expressions filled with newfound respect and loyalty. The grizzled soldier, who had challenged her earlier, was among the first, bowing his head with a look of reverence. "My queen," he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of his faith in her. "We will follow you." Mira felt a surge of triumph, but she kept her emotions in check, knowing that this was only the beginning. She was now not just Mira, the Starion heir. She was their leader, their queen. And with this title came the responsibility to protect them, to fight for them, no matter the cost. Over the following weeks, Mira trained with the Loyalists, honing her powers further under their guidance. She learned to control her telepathy, to shield herself from unwanted intrusions, and even began experimenting with energy manipulation, summoning shields, creating bursts of force, and amplifying her physical abilities. Each day she grew stronger, her control and confidence deepening with every challenge. Nox remained at her side, advising her on strategy and helping her prepare for the battle that lay ahead. Despite the lingering tension between them, Mira felt a grudging respect for him. He had risked everything to bring her here, and he now served her with an unwavering loyalty that she couldn't ignore. But as her strength grew, so did the looming threat of the faction. Rumors trickled in of spies in the outer realms, agents of the faction who had heard whispers of the Starion heir's return. The Loyalists had scouts stationed on the borders of their hidden base, but Mira knew it was only a matter of time before the faction would strike, bringing the full weight of their forces upon her. Late one night, as she stood on a ridge overlooking the mountains, Mira felt the familiar, eerie sensation of being watched. She reached out with her mind, scanning the surrounding area, and felt a faint, dark energy in the distance, a presence that was unmistakable. Ilara. Myra's heart pounded, her muscles tensing as she realized that Ilara, the faction leader who had confronted her in the inn, had returned. This time, she could feel the strength of Ilara's presence, sharper and more focused, a predator stalking her prey. She turned, calling out to Nox and the others, alerting them to the danger. Within moments, the Loyalists rallied, preparing for the coming battle. Mira felt the blue stone pulse in her hand, its warmth filling her with a calm, steady strength. She was ready. The clash was fierce and unrelenting. Ilara's forces swarmed through the mountains, their attacks swift and coordinated. Mira fought alongside her people, her powers a weapon she wielded with deadly precision. She summoned shields to protect the Loyalists, sent blasts of energy to scatter her enemies, and moved with a speed and agility she hadn't known she possessed. But it was when she faced Ilara herself that Mira truly understood her strength. The two clashed in a whirlwind of energy, their powers colliding in flashes of light and heat. Mira felt the weight of her lineage behind her, the strength of her ancestors flowing through her as she held her ground. The battle against Ilara and the faction forces had lasted hours, but to Mira, it felt like an eternity. She moved through the battlefield, her body fueled by a relentless drive, her powers blazing with a strength that astonished even her. She summoned shields, directed energy blasts, and wielded telepathic attacks with precision. She was no longer the timid librarian. She had become the warrior queen of Starion. In the heart of the chaos, Mira finally confronted Ilara. The faction leader was formidable, her power honed by years of experience and driven by a ruthless desire to destroy the Starion bloodline. The two women clashed in an intense, silent struggle, their powers blazing around them in arcs of shimmering blue and deadly crimson. "You are nothing but a shadow, Mira," Ilara sneered, hurling a blast of dark energy toward her. A child pretending to be a queen, Mira held her ground, summoning a shield of pure energy to deflect the attack. "I am Mira of Starion," she declared, her voice steady and fierce. "And I won't let you destroy what belongs to my people." Ilara's face twisted in fury, but Mira saw a glint of fear in her eyes, the faintest flicker of doubt. Sensing her opponent's vulnerability, Mira pushed forward, focusing all her energy into one final, powerful strike. She reached deep within herself, summoning the strength of her ancestors, the legacy of her mother, and let it flow through her. A surge of brilliant blue light exploded from her, enveloping Ilara in a wave of energy. When the light faded, Ilara was gone, her dark energy dissipated, leaving only a faint wisp of smoke in her place. Mira stood in the silence, her chest heaving as she took in the aftermath of the battle. Around her, the Loyalists were victorious, the faction's forces either retreating or lying defeated across the rocky landscape. The air was filled with the scent of charred earth, the lingering echoes of power still vibrating through the ground. As the remaining Loyalists gathered around her, their expressions a mixture of awe and gratitude, Mira felt a surge of pride tempered by sorrow. They had won, but the cost had been steep. Many lives had been lost, and the sacrifices made that day would linger in her heart forever. She felt the weight of those sacrifices, the burden of leadership, settle over her like a cloak. It was a mantle she accepted willingly, for she knew now that it was her duty, her destiny. One of the loyalists, the grizzled soldier who had once questioned her strength, stepped forward, bowing deeply. "You are truly our queen," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "We are honored to serve you." Mira nodded, her gaze steady as she looked at each of her loyalists. "We've taken a great step today, but our journey is far from over. Starion is waiting for us, and it is our duty to reclaim it and restore it to its former glory." A cheer rose from the group, a shout of triumph and unity that reverberated through the mountains. They had reclaimed their pride, their strength, and their purpose. And Mira knew that this was only the beginning. In the days that followed, Mira and her loyalists began the long journey back to Starion. The path was grueling, and the toll of the battle weighed heavily on everyone. But they marched with renewed resolve, their spirits lifted by the hope of returning to their homeland. Mira traveled at the front, her eyes fixed on the distant stars, feeling their guiding pull as they drew closer to the galaxy that was once her family's domain. Nox remained by her side, his loyalty unshaken. Their relationship, once strained by deception and distrust, had transformed into a deep and unbreakable bond forged through shared hardship. Mira had come to realize that Nox's actions, however flawed, had always been driven by his dedication to her and her family's legacy. She respected him now, valued his counsel, and even considered him a friend. One evening, as they camped under a canopy of stars, Mira sat beside Nox, both of them silent as they gazed at the sky. The night was quiet, the air filled with a sense of peace and anticipation. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice soft. "For everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Nox looked at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "You were always capable of this, Mira. I only helped you see it." They sat in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Mira felt a warmth in her heart, a sense of gratitude for the journey they had taken together, the trials they had overcome. She knew now that she could trust him, that his loyalty was unwavering, and it was a comfort she hadn't known she needed. Finally, after weeks of travel, they arrived at the edge of the Starion galaxy. Myra's heart raced as she took in the sight before her, the beautiful, sprawling planet that had once been her mother's home, the seat of their legacy. Starion's atmosphere shimmered with vibrant hues, a mixture of blue and green that sparkled like precious gems in the light of its sun. They descended, landing in the heart of the capital city. The sight that met them was both familiar and heart-wrenching. The once great city of Solara, with its towering spires and grand palaces, lay in ruins. Buildings were crumbled, the streets filled with debris, and the air held a faint, lingering scent of smoke and ash. The faction's control had left the city battered and scarred, its beauty diminished by years of occupation. Mira felt a surge of anger and sadness as she surveyed the devastation. This was her inheritance, her people's home, and it had been desecrated by those who sought only power. But she would rebuild it. She would restore Starion to its former glory, no matter how long it took. As Mira and her loyalists moved through the city, word of her arrival spread like wildfire. People emerged from their homes, gathering in the streets to catch a glimpse of their queen. Faces filled with awe, hope, and disbelief watched her pass, and Mira felt the weight of their gazes, the hopes they pinned on her. She stopped, looking at the crowd, and took a deep breath. "My people," she called, her voice carrying over the crowd. "I am Mira of Starion, your queen, and I have returned to reclaim what was taken from us. Together, we will rebuild our world, restore our strength, and honor those who have fallen. Starion will rise again." The crowd erupted in cheers, voices lifting in a chorus of joy and relief. For the first time in years, the people of Starion felt a glimmer of hope, a promise of a better future. Mira looked at their faces, each one a reminder of the responsibility she carried, the lives that depended on her. As the days passed, Mira threw herself into the work of rebuilding her world. She met with former leaders, recruited new allies, and worked tirelessly to restore the city and bring order to Starion. Her powers continued to grow, her connection to the blue stone strengthening, and she felt her mother's presence guiding her, an invisible hand that steadied her when doubts crept in. Knox remained a trusted advisor, his insights invaluable as they navigated the complex task of restoring Starion's government and defending it from remaining faction forces that still lurked in the shadows. Though the threat was diminished, Mira knew that her journey was far from over. The faction would not give up easily, and she would need to remain vigilant, prepared to defend her people at any cost. One evening, as she stood on the balcony of the restored palace, looking out over the city, Mira felt a quiet sense of fulfillment settle over her. She had come so far, transformed from a quiet librarian into a queen, a warrior, a leader. She had faced darkness, betrayal, and unimaginable challenges, yet she had emerged stronger, guided by the legacy of her mother and the love she felt for her people. The stars above shone brightly, a reminder of the vastness of the universe, the endless possibilities that lay before her. She knew that her journey was not over, that there would be more battles, more trials. But she was ready, with a final, silent promise to her mother, to her people, and to herself. Mira turned back toward the palace, her heart filled with purpose. She was Mira of Starion, queen of a world reborn, and she would protect her people, her legacy, and her home. No matter what lay ahead, she would face it with courage and strength, guided by the stars and the unbreakable spirit of Starion. And so, Mira began her reign, her heart forever entwined with the fate of her people, her gaze always lifted toward the stars.